I have been sitting on this bench for 30 years. In that time, I have seen every flavor of idiot, every shade of liar, and every variety of person who believes their bank account buys them a different set of rules. I have heard every excuse in the book, seen every crocodile tear, and suffered through the most absurd justifications for human cruelty. But never, and I mean never, have I felt my blood pressure spike quite as fast as it did on the morning of Tuesday, November 14th. That was the day political arrogance walked into my courtroom on crocodile skin heels and tried to wipe its feet on an honest man's dignity. It was a day that reminded me exactly why I still do this, why I still bang that gavel, and why I refuse to let the powerful trample the people who actually make this city run. The file had hit my desk the afternoon before. At a glance, it looked like a simple disorderly conduct case from a local elementary school. Nothing special. My court clerk, Martha, had set the folder down with a heavy sigh, the kind that tells you she's seen enough of the world to be thoroughly exhausted by it. She had stuck a bright red sticky note on the front, and her handwriting was sharp, urgent. Judge, it read, you need to brace yourself. The video evidence in here is truly hard to watch. The defendant was Elena Sterling, 45 years old, the wife of State Senator Michael Sterling. He was the man currently running for his third term on a campaign slogan for the working people. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Ironically, his wife, the woman he claimed represented the working class, was standing before the bar for allegedly trampling on those exact people. The next morning, Elena walked into my courtroom like she was gracing us with her presence at a charity fundraising gala, not appearing before a judge on criminal charges. She had a platinum blonde updo that looked like it cost a week's salary, a custom Chanel suit that was easily a $5,000 minimum, and a crocodile skin Hermes Birkin bag resting carelessly on her arm. Her Jimmy Choo heels clicked a rhythm of absolute, unearned pride against my courthouse floor. Trailing behind her, like loyal soldiers, were 3 lawyers in glossy, tailored black suits from the most expensive firm in the city. They looked like they were ready to sue the building for the crime of existing. She sat down, removed her Dior sunglasses with a slow, dramatic flair, and looked around the courtroom as if she had accidentally wandered into the wrong zip code. Then, she pulled out her phone, started scrolling, and completely ignored my presence. In 30 years on this bench, nobody has ever done that. Not once. That was strike one. On the other side of the room, the contrast was staggering. There, shrinking into the hard, unforgiving wooden bench, was Mr. Arthur Jenkins. He was 68 years old, a janitor at Lincoln Elementary for 25 years. His dark blue uniform was faded at the shoulders and fraying at the cuffs, and his hands rough, calloused, honest hands were clasped tightly in his lap. Beside him, there were no expensive lawyers, just a young public defender, looking nervous, trying to calm him down. The visual alone was a condemnation. I banged the gavel, not just to call order, but to wake them up. "Mrs. Sterling," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut the air, "do you understand why you are here today?" She didn't even stand up. She let out a theatrical, bored sigh and whispered something to her lead attorney, the kind of gesture that communicates total contempt for the process. She clearly thought this was a mistake, a minor inconvenience that her checkbook would resolve before lunch. She was about to learn that in my courtroom, the currency isn't money, it's the truth. And the truth is the most expensive thing you will ever have to pay for. "Counselor," I cut him off, my voice echoing off the courtroom walls, "do not insult my intelligence. We are not here to discuss political campaigns, and we are certainly not here to accommodate your client's busy schedule. Your motion to dismiss is denied." I turned my gaze toward the defense table. Elena hadn't even bothered to look up from her phone. She was scrolling with the indifference of someone checking a weather report in another country. "It was breathtakingly disrespectful, Mrs. Sterling," I commanded, "put the phone away. You are in a court of law, not a coffee shop." She sighed, a slow, audible exhale of pure irritation, and finally tossed the device onto the table. "This is absurd," she muttered. "Not to me, but to the air, loud enough for the stenographer to catch. I have a luncheon in an hour. My husband is a state senator, and he doesn't appreciate me being dragged into this misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the bench. "Mrs. Sterling, let me be very clear. You are charged with third-degree assault, disorderly conduct, and harassment. This isn't a parking ticket. This is a criminal matter. And before you utter another word about your schedule, I suggest you look at the man sitting on the other side of this room." She finally shifted her head, but she didn't look at Arthur. She glanced at the bench like he was a stain on the carpet. He ruined my shoes, she said, her voice dripping with venomous entitlement. Custom-made Italian leather. The water, the soap. It was a disaster. I should be the one suing him for property damage, not the other way around. The courtroom went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop a mile away. Even her lawyer, Richard, stiffened, a flicker of panic crossing his face. He knew she'd just handed me everything I needed. You say he ruined your shoes? I repeated, my tone dropping to that dangerously low register that usually meant trouble for the person on the other end. The indictment doesn't mention property damage, Mrs. Sterling. It mentions a physical assault. It mentions you forcing a man to get on his knees and lick them clean. I didn't give her a chance to retort. I signaled the bailiff. Let's skip the opinions and watch the video. I prefer facts. The large monitor in the corner of the room flickered to life. The date stamp read, November 14th, 2:15 p.m., Lincoln Elementary main hallway. On screen, Mr. Arthur was there, pushing a heavy, industrial-sized mop bucket. He looked slow, methodical, doing his job, cleaning up the muddy footprints left by hundreds of children. And it was clear he had placed a bright yellow wet floor sign right in the center of the hallway. He was following protocol. He was doing his job. Then, the door swung open, and Elena Sterling burst into the frame. She wasn't walking. She was storming. Phone to her ear, head down, completely oblivious to the world around her. She was a whirlwind of privilege and speed. She walked right past the yellow warning sign. Her handbag clipped the mop handle. The bucket wobbled, tipped, and a small splash of soapy water hit the toe of her left shoe, an accident caused entirely by her own frantic, self-absorbed haste. She froze. She looked at her shoe. She looked at Mr. Arthur. She didn't check to see if she'd hurt him. She didn't offer a word of grace. The video captured the moment her face twisted into something truly ugly, a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The screen showed the hallway. Arthur, a man of simple dignity, had knelt down. His knees, stiff with the wear and tear of 25 years of honest labor, hit the linoleum. He reached for a rag, his hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the shock of the encounter. He wasn't thinking about politics or state budgets or the high and mighty status of the woman before him. He was thinking about being a good person, about not leaving a mess for someone else to deal with. He whispered, "I'm so sorry, ma'am, I didn't mean to." And that's when she did it. The courtroom was paralyzed. The silence was so heavy, it felt like lead. On the screen, Elena didn't just walk away. She didn't just scoff and continue her phone call. She lunged. With a flick of her heel, those custom-made, Italian leather, $5,000 shoes she cared so much about, she kicked the rag out of his trembling hand. It skittered across the floor like a dead insect, leaving a streak of soapy water behind it. "Don't touch me with that filthy rag," she snapped, her voice sharp, cold enough to freeze water in the middle of summer. "You want to act like a piece of trash? Then clean it like one. Get down there. Use your mouth." A collective gasp sucked the oxygen right out of my courtroom. I saw the young public defender beside Arthur, pale as a sheet. Even the high-priced lawyers at the defense table, men and women paid to defend the indefensible, physically flinched. They looked away, eyes fixed on the floor, ashamed to be in the same zip code as their client. I watched her face on the screen, the pure, unadulterated satisfaction she felt in that moment. It wasn't about the water. It wasn't about the suede. It was about dominance. She wanted to see a human being lower himself because, in her warped, elitist worldview, she deemed him unworthy of standing on the same level as her. She wanted to see him break. I hit the pause button. The image froze Arthur, looking up from the floor, broken, confused, and humiliated, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. And there was Elena, towering over him, her face twisted into a mask of pure reptilian malice. "Lights," I ordered. The courtroom lights came back up, blinding and harsh. I didn't say a word for a full 30 seconds. I let the silence hang there, thick and suffocating, waiting for her to feel the weight of what she had just displayed to the world. Elena was busy checking her cuticles, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just committed professional, social, and legal suicide in high definition. She finally looked up, caught my gaze, and had the absolute gall to roll her eyes. "Your Honor," she said, her voice dripping with that practiced, condescending tone that makes my teeth ache. "It looks worse on video than it actually was. He was being dramatic, and besides, he didn't actually do it." The principal stopped him. "So, really, no harm done, right?" "No harm done?" I repeated. my voice quiet, dangerous, the kind of calm that comes before a hurricane. Mrs. Sterling, you threatened a man's pension, his health insurance, his very ability to survive, all because you couldn't be bothered to watch where you were walking. You treated a human being like a floor mat, and you think the fact that the act wasn't completed makes it no harm done? She smirked. He's a janitor, Judge. It's his job to clean messes. My husband is a senator. We have standards. I was merely holding him to his. I stood up. I didn't just lean forward. I stood up. The entire courtroom seemed to tilt on its axis. Your husband is a public servant, I thundered, my gavel hovering, and you just admitted to using his position to terrorize a citizen. You think your husband's title gives you value, and you think Mr. Arthur's job title takes his away? Let me tell you something about value, Mrs. Sterling. The video continued. It was a slow-motion car crash of human decency. On screen, Mr. Arthur, a man of simple dignity, had knelt down. His knees, stiff with the wear and tear of 25 years of honest labor, hit the linoleum. He reached for a rag, his hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the shock of the encounter. He wasn't thinking about politics or state budgets or the high and mighty status of the woman before him. He was thinking about being a good person, about not leaving a mess for someone else to deal with. He whispered, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't mean to." And that's when she did it. The courtroom was paralyzed. The silence was so heavy it felt like lead. On the screen, Elena didn't just walk away. She didn't just scoff and continue her phone call. She lunged. With a flick of her heel, those custom-made Italian leather, $5,000 shoes she cared so much about, she kicked the rag out of his trembling hand. It skittered across the floor like a dead insect, leaving a streak of soapy water behind it. "Don't touch me with that filthy rag," she snapped, her voice sharp, cold enough to freeze water in the middle of summer. "You want to act like a piece of trash? Then clean it like one. Get down there. Use your mouth." A collective gasp sucked the oxygen right out of my courtroom. I saw the young public defender beside Arthur, pale as a sheet. Even the high-priced lawyers at the defense table, men and women paid to defend the indefensible, physically flinched. They looked away, eyes fixed on the floor, ashamed to be in the same zip code as their client. I watched her face on the screen, the pure, unadulterated satisfaction she felt in that moment. It wasn't about the water. It wasn't about the suede. It was about dominance. She wanted to see a human being lower himself because, in her warped, elitist worldview, she deemed him unworthy of standing on the same level as her. She wanted to see him break. I hit the pause button. The image froze Arthur, looking up from the floor, broken, confused, and humiliated, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. And there was Elena, towering over him, her face twisted into a mask of pure, reptilian malice. "Lights," I ordered. The courtroom lights came back up, blinding and harsh. I didn't say a word for a full 30 seconds. I let the silence hang there, thick and suffocating, waiting for her to feel the weight of what she had just displayed to the world. Elena was busy checking her cuticles, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just committed professional, social, and legal suicide in high definition. She finally looked up, caught my gaze, and had the absolute gall to roll her eyes. "Your Honor," she said, her voice dripping with that practiced, condescending tone that makes my teeth ache. "It looks worse on video than it actually was. He was being dramatic. And besides, he didn't actually do it. The principal stopped him. So, really no harm done, right?" "No harm done?" I repeated, my voice rising just enough to vibrate the wood of the bench. "Mrs. Sterling, you threatened a man's livelihood, his health care, his very ability to survive, all because of a water spot on a shoe. You are a public figure's wife. You know exactly what that threat means." "He's a janitor, Judge," she countered, as if explaining gravity to a toddler. "It's his job to clean messes. My husband is a senator. We have standards." "Your husband is a public servant," I corrected, "and you just admitted to using his position to terrorize a citizen. You think your husband's title gives you value, and you think Mr. Arthur's job title takes his away? Let me tell you something about value, Mrs. Sterling." I didn't let her answer. I turned to the prosecutor. "Is there more?" "Yes, Your Honor," the prosecutor replied, his eyes locked on Elena. When the principal came out to stop this, Mrs. Sterling didn't stop. She turned her rage on the school staff. "We'd like to call Mrs. Sarah Higgins to the stand." Elena leaned back, a smug smirk playing on her lips. "Let the little teacher talk," she whispered, clearly relishing the spectacle. "My husband approves the school budget. Let's see what she dares to say." She had no idea what was coming. She was playing a game of chess while I was preparing to flip the table. Value? You want to talk about value, Mrs. Sterling? I leaned forward, my gaze pinning her to the defense chair. She tried to look away, but I didn't let her. You believe your husband's title gives you value, and you believe Mr. Arthur's job title takes his away. You think the world is a simple hierarchy, with you at the top, covered in Chanel and indifference, and him at the bottom, covered in soap and hard work. You think that makes you a giant and him a speck of dust. I paused, letting that sink in. The courtroom was deathly quiet. Well, isn't that just how the world works? She scoffed, though her voice lacked the earlier bite. She was starting to realize she was losing the narrative. Is that so? I replied, my voice steady. Then let's talk about contribution. Let's talk about what a human being is actually worth. Mr. Prosecutor, call your next witness. The prosecutor stood up. The state calls Dr. James Miller, Chief of Surgery at Providence General Hospital, to the stand. Elena frowned, her brow furrowing in genuine confusion. A surgeon? What is this? Did he mop the operating room floor? Is this a cleaning supply convention? I didn't dignify that with a response. I just watched as a man in a crisp gray suit walked to the stand. Dr. James Miller was the embodiment of quiet authority, the kind of confidence you see in a person who holds a scalpel over a heart every day. He took the oath, his eyes scanning the courtroom, and then they landed on Mr. Arthur. And to everyone's absolute astonishment, the eyes of this distinguished surgeon, a man who probably stared down life and death daily, filled with tears. Dr. Miller, the prosecutor began, can you explain your relationship with the defendant, Elena Sterling? I have none, Dr. Miller said, his voice cold and precise, not once glancing at her. But I have a lifelong relationship with the man she called trash. He pointed at Arthur. The courtroom held its breath. 30 years ago, Dr. Miller said, his voice cracking just a fraction. I was a student at Lincoln Elementary. I was a foster kid, angry, hungry, hopeless, with holes in my sneakers in the middle of winter. That man. He found me hiding in the boiler room after I'd been suspended. I thought he'd turn me in. Instead, he shared his sandwich with me and listened to a 10-year-old boy cry for an hour. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Elena seemed to stop breathing. For 6 years, Miller continued, his voice growing stronger, Arthur was the only father figure I had. When I had no lunch money, there was always an extra apple on my desk. When I wanted to drop out, he waited for me by the school gate every afternoon. When I got into medical school, I couldn't afford the books. I found an envelope with $500 cash. It took me 10 years to learn that Arthur had sold his only truck to get that money. He walked 5 miles to work every day for a year so I could become a doctor. A sob broke from the back of the room. Even the bailiff, a man who had seen everything, was blinking hard. Mr. Arthur isn't just a janitor. Dr. Miller looked directly at Elena, his expression one of pure, unadulterated resolve. He is a guardian angel. I save hearts, Mrs. Sterling, but Mr. Arthur, he saves souls. As Dr. Miller walked past the defense table, he didn't look at Elena with hatred or vengeance. He looked at her with a profound, stinging pity, the kind of look you give to someone who is terminally ill and doesn't know it yet. Elena, however, was having none of it. She glared back at him, her jaw tight, already composing the smear campaign she'd unleash on him the moment she got her hands on a phone. She stood up before her lawyer could even open his mouth. She walked to the witness stand with the self-important strut of a woman who had never had to wait in line for anything in her life. She took the oath as if she were doing the Bible a favor, her eyes scanning the room for an audience. I don't need witnesses, she declared, tossing her platinum hair. I'll testify myself. Go ahead, Judge. Ask me anything. But be careful. The election is next week, and my husband is watching. I'm sure he'll be very interested in how his wife is treated here today. She had just threatened me. In my own courtroom. On the official record. I took off my glasses, laid them gently on the bench, and leaned forward until my face was inches from the microphone. My court reporter, a veteran who had seen me handle everything from petty thieves to career criminals, stopped typing for a split second, her eyes wide. You just told me to be careful in my own courtroom, Mrs. Sterling, I said, my voice dangerously soft. You are under oath. Do you understand what that means? It means I expect the truth, which is a concept you people seem to be struggling with today. And frankly, your husband's election campaign is about as relevant to this assault charge as the color of your shoes. She sneered, a small, ugly flicker of amusement. I have a luncheon at 12:30, Your Honor. Can we move this along? Mr. Arthur is worried about his precious health insurance, and I have actual responsibilities. Mr. Arthur is worried about keeping his livelihood, and you are worried about being late for a social hour, I snapped, the gavel slamming down. Priorities, Mrs. Sterling. Some of us have important schedules. Now, back to the facts. On the video, we heard you explicitly demand Mr. Arthur clean your shoe with his mouth. Did you say those words? She shrugged, a gesture so dismissive it was almost reflexive. It was a figure of speech. I was angry. In the real world, where my husband and I operate, when you make a mistake, you pay for it. I was simply teaching him accountability. It was his choice. His choice? I repeated, incredulous. You called your own extortion his choice? You truly believe that because you are wealthy and powerful, you have the right to strip another human being of their dignity? She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed in the high ceilings of the court. Dignity? Judge, let's be real. He's a janitor. Society has a hierarchy. I am at the top, he is at the bottom. That is not cruelty. That is just how the world works. If he wanted dignity, he should have worked harder in school. I glanced over at the gallery. Mr. Arthur was sitting there, his head bowed, his hands shaking in his lap. Dr. Miller was beside him, his hand firm on the older man's shoulder. The irony was so profound it was invisible to her. She was so blinded by her own altitude that she couldn't see the giant standing right in front of her. You mentioned your husband is watching, I said, my voice icy. You mentioned the election. What exactly are you implying, Mrs. Sterling? She leaned into the microphone, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Michael doesn't like activist judges attacking his family. If you find me guilty, it won't look good for you, Judge. He sits on the Judicial Review Board. He approves the budget for this very courthouse. Do you understand what I'm saying? Dismiss this case. Make the old man apologize to me. And when Michael wins next week, maybe there's a federal judgeship in it for you. We can make that happen. The room went completely, deathly still. She had just offered me a bribe, a federal judgeship for a dismissal. She had smiled when she said it, the smile of someone who had never, not once in her entire life, been told no. So, he bought you a sandwich. Does that give him the right to ruin my shoes? Elena scoffed, her voice echoing in the sudden silence of the courtroom. She looked at Dr. Miller as if he were an insect she'd found on her dinner plate. This is a court of law, Dr. Miller, not a Hallmark movie. I'm sure your sentimentality is very charming at the hospital, but it has absolutely no bearing on the fact that I was assaulted by a reckless employee. Mrs. Sterling, Dr. Miller said, his voice cold and precise, unfazed by her venom. Those shoes cost more than Mr. Arthur makes in a month. When I offered to buy him a new truck to repay him for the years of support, he refused. He told me to give the money to the school library instead. He said, the kids need books. He didn't want a dime for himself. Your Honor, the prosecutor cut in. She didn't just kick a janitor. She assaulted the most honorable man in this city. Elena didn't wait for her lawyer. She stood up, smoothing her skirt as if she were accepting an award, and marched to the witness stand. She took the oath as though she were doing the Bible a favor. I don't need witnesses, she declared, looking directly at me with a smirk that was as polished as it was hollow. I'll testify myself. Go ahead, Judge. Ask me anything. But be careful. The election is next week, and my husband is watching. The room went ice cold. The threat was explicit, dangling in the air like a guillotine blade. She wasn't just testifying, she was warning the court. You just told me to be careful in my courtroom, Mrs. Sterling, I said, my voice dropping low and dangerous. You are under oath. Do you understand what that means? It means I tell the truth, which you and your people seem to be struggling with today. I have a luncheon at 12:30, and I'm losing my patience. A luncheon? She actually laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Mr. Arthur is worried about his health insurance, and you're worried about being late for lunch. Priorities, Your Honor. Some of us have important schedules. On the video, I continued, ignoring her insolence, we heard you demand Mr. Arthur clean your shoe with his mouth. Did you say those words? It was a figure of speech, she replied, her eyes flashing. I was angry. In the real world, where my husband and I operate, when you make a mistake, you pay for it. I was teaching him accountability. It was his choice. Really? His choice? I stared at her, genuinely baffled by the sheer audacity of her delusion. You believe that because you are wealthy and powerful, you have the right to strip another human being of their dignity? Dignity? She laughed again, tossing her head back. He's a janitor, Judge. Society has a hierarchy. I am at the top, He is at the bottom. That is not cruelty. That is just how the world works. If he wanted dignity, he should have worked harder in school. I glanced at Dr. Miller in the gallery, the man who became a surgeon because of the very man she was currently disparaging. The irony was invisible from her altitude, lost in the clouds of her own privilege. You mentioned your husband is watching, I said, leaning over the bench. You mentioned the election. What exactly are you implying? Elena leaned into the microphone, dropping her voice to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. Michael doesn't like activist judges attacking his wife. If you find me guilty, it won't look good for you, Judge. He sits on the Judicial Review Board. He approves the budget for this very courthouse. Do you understand what I'm saying? The courtroom gasped. I didn't. I just sat back, closed the file, and felt the familiar, sharp clarity of a judge who had just found the truth. She had just offered me a bribe in open court. She had just committed the very crime she was trying to avoid. Mrs. Sterling, I said, my voice echoing, you have made a very serious miscalculation. You assume that because you have a price tag on your soul, everyone else does too. On the charges of third-degree assault, harassment, and disorderly conduct, I continued, the gavel poised in my hand, you are guilty on all counts. Normally, for a first-time offender, I might consider probation. But you have shown zero remorse. You tried to bribe the court, and you threatened the judiciary. You leave me no choice. I looked her dead in the eye. I am sentencing you to the full 365 days in county jail. No early release, no special treatment, a year for a shoe. And let me tell you, Mrs. Sterling, it was never about the shoe. It was about the power. You tried to use yours to crush a man, and now the law is using its power to correct you. She looked as though she'd been slapped. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale beneath that expensive makeup. And, I added, holding up a finger to stop her lawyers from interjecting, on the felony charges of attempted bribery and obstruction of justice, I am binding those over to the grand jury. Separate bail is set at $500,000. Until that is paid, you remain in custody. Real fear, the kind that makes your hands shake and your breath shallow, finally arrived. Her lawyers were already packing their briefcases, distancing themselves from the train wreck they were defending. Richard, she shrieked, clutching the arm of her chair. Do something. Get me out of here. I can't, Elena, Richard whispered back, his voice thick with a mixture of professional detachment and genuine distaste. You threatened a judge on the record. You're on your own. Just then, my bailiff handed me a note. Senator Michael Sterling had arrived. He was in the building, demanding to enter. He wasn't just here to support his wife. He was here to storm the castle. Let him in, I said to the bailiff. But tell him he enters as an observer, not a participant. One outburst and he goes to holding two. The doors burst open. Michael Sterling marched down the center aisle like a general heading to a losing battle. He was in a navy suit, an American flag pin on his lapel, his face a mask of practiced, booming indignation. What is the meaning of this? He shouted, his voice filling the room. Unhand her immediately. Do you have any idea who you are manhandling? Officer, I said, my voice icy, do not let go of the defendant. Senator, one more step toward this bench, and I will have you in cuffs right next to her. He stopped, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. You are making a mistake, Judge. I've already called the governor. Release her on her own recognizance, or by tomorrow morning, you'll be presiding over traffic tickets in the basement. I picked up the transcript, flipping through the pages. Senator, everything you are saying is being recorded on the official transcript. So, I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. Your wife was just convicted of assault. She is also being held on felony bribery charges in which she explicitly linked your political influence to the outcome of this trial. Did you authorize her to offer bribes and make threats on your behalf? The color drained from his face so fast it was like watching a ghost appear. The confidence, the bravado, the arrogance, it all evaporated. He looked at Elena, and for the first time, he didn't see a political asset. He saw a liability. She said that? He stammered, looking at her with genuine horror. Michael, Elena screamed, tears of betrayal streaking her makeup. Tell them who we are. Tell them you told me to fix it. You told me to do whatever it took. I have no knowledge of this, he said, his voice cold, distancing himself with every syllable. I never authorized her to say those things. If she did that, she acted alone. I am a man of the law. I respect the judicial process. I cannot condone bribery. I banged the gavel. Senator, front row, you are an observer. Sit down. He sat. He looked like a deflated balloon. Every person in that room understood exactly what had just happened. He had thrown his own wife under the bus to save his campaign. The power had left the building, and Elena Sterling was left standing in the wreckage of her own making, completely and utterly alone.